When talking about environmental issues and bringing together issues of hope, faith, social justice, and the integrity of creation, we go through some sad stories, and you here know very well some of the underside of where our particular human journey is taking us at this time. So when we talk about taking leaps, we also talk about leaping not only in faith, but also in hope. And I like how you, as organizers of the conference and participants, have struck the note of hope in your subtitle. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about how we understand this leap that we are called to, this stretching of our personal, political, spiritual lives to embrace many on the margins of our culture, the poor, endangered species, Aboriginals, and others who have been steamrolled at times or ignored in our quest for modern glory. So, that being said, I sometimes have an attempt at humor because it can get pretty depressing when we're talking about some of the various environmental issues. So this is just a little attempt at humor that we'll explore. And this is the price of gas in France. So, there was a thief. And he was in Paris and he planned to steal some paintings from the Louvre. So he was masterminding his scheme. And after careful planning, he was able to get past security, he was able to steal the paintings, and he made it safely to his van. However, he was captured only 2 blocks away when his van ran out of gas. So the police were mystified. This is a brilliant crime. How in the world did he do this? So they asked him, how could you mastermind such a crime and then make such an obvious error? He replied, Monsieur, that is the reason I stole the paintings. And they said, what? And he said, well, I had no money. Too bad you guys. To make the van go. Now, see if you have the gall to tell us. I'm trying to see because I have nothing to lose. So, it's important to remember that if we're in this moment of climate change and challenge, it's also a moment of special excitement, joy, and great work, to quote Thomas Berry, the great work before us. And if we do not have laughter and joy and dancing and some celebratory attitudes toward this beautiful creation, then people won't want to be with us. As Martin Luther King said, if we do not paint a picture of the future that people are drawn to, they won't join us there. And we who speak within and to faith communities that have been through the long haul, through many trials and tribulations over generations, know about joy in dark times. It's one of the great contributions that faith communities do and can, and I hope will make, as we face some of the bleak data that you know well about in terms of climate change, in terms of species extinction. These are very difficult times. And they're so remarkable that geophysicists are now actually trying to think, what do we name this period? We have different eras that are named, Cenozoic, etc. What do we call our time? And geophysicists are actually thinking about calling this the Anthropocene, because the human is in such control of geological evolution. With species extinction, climate change, the human actually changing the climate of the planet. So the human is becoming someone who is helping in a direct way dictate the evolutionary path of Gaia, our Earth system. And that's why they are thinking of calling our time the Anthropocene. And I remember as a little kid going through the Bronx Zoo in New York. It was a big trip to New York City, and you see the wild tigers and the lions and the bears, oh my, and then you come to the end, and there's a mirror. And you look into that mirror, and it says you are now looking at the most dangerous animal the world has ever known. And you're a 10-year-old kid, you know, like a what's that? The Anthropocene. We are a very dangerous species. And as we know, we are, at this time, forcing into extinction between 40 and 140 species each day of flora and fauna. This is from David Wordsworth with Earth in Mind. And we don't know the exact number. But for people of faith, if we were to get a report card from our Creator on our stewardship, I don't think the grade would be a very high one. And in the comments section, there might be something like, does not play well with other species. We are being called to play better with other species. Now, I want to get a little Canadian content here. Part of what I do and many of the people in this room do is not only work on policy issues, work on initiatives of strategic energy savings and retrofitting. We also are dealing with the world of worldviews. How our personhood and our culture defines the human, and what is the role or vocation of the human in light of the unfolding not only of our Earth system, but the universe itself. This is something that religions and philosophies ask. And at this particular time, when we are emerging in the Anthropocene era, this notion of what our role is, what worldview do we subscribe to, becomes important. This little clip is from The Great Outdoors, and you'll see two Canadian actors, some local grown talent. John Candy, who went to school at Neil McNeil High School here in Toronto, towards Scharper, and also, of course, Dan Aykroyd from Kingston, Ontario. The background of this clip is John Candy the character John Candy plays has gone to a beautiful place in the great outdoors with his family to enjoy the bucolic wonders of the place he went to as a child. His obnoxious brother-in-law, Roman, invades his space, arrives unannounced, and Roman has a very different approach to the natural world, as you'll see.
The whole week he'll be here. Okay. Oh, wow. Just something.
So anyway, you're an intelligent man.
Thank you.
Make a good living.
Not bad.
Get a good life.
Pretty good.
Answer me one question.
Sure.
Why the hell would you want to come up to a plant-infested no-man's land like this and live like a barbarian for a week?
You wouldn't understand.
Try me.
I have great memories of this country when I was a kid, you know, and I used to come up here with my dad, and I want the boys to have the same memories. I mean, look around you, Roman, for God's sakes. This is beautiful country here. Take a good look.
I'll tell you what I see when I look out there, if you want to know.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I see the underdeveloped resources of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I see a syndicated development consortium exploiting over $1.5 billion in forest products. I see a paper mill, and if the strategic metals are there, a mining operation. A greenbelt between the condos on the lake and a waste management facility, focusing on the newest rage in toxic waste, medical refuse. Infected bandages, body parts, IV tubing, contaminated glassware, entrails, syringes, fluid, blood, low-grade radioactive waste, all safely contained, sunken in the lake, and sealed for centuries. Now, I ask you, what do you see?
I just see trees.
Well, no one ever accused you of having the grand vision.
Nope.
Maybe it's all for the best, while the ambitious scramble for wealth and power, the Chet Ripleys of the world are just able to lay back and casually stroll along life's path. I mean that as a compliment.
Oh, thanks.
The rest of us are all probably going to die of heart attacks and strokes long before you.
I hope so. Wouldn't that be great?
A clash of worldviews there, of course. And what's interesting is, at least for me, that the Dan Aykroyd character has a glib, forceful vision of the modern conquest of nature. And the John Candy character just sees trees, that his own vision and love and aesthetic connection to the natural world doesn't have the same forcefulness, the same narrative, the same energy. And I think this is something that we face now. Where do we find the narrative, the energy, the passion to counter and exploitative modernist dominating the world. And someone who is helping us think about this is David Orr, who teaches at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. Oberlin is a very liberal arts institution in the United States, established in the 1830s. First to accept African Americans in 1837, first school to accept women as equals, and the first school, according to their literature, to have a LEEDS building, a LEED certified building, which is the Lewis Environmental Studies building. I was down there not too long ago, speaking of energy generation, and students were in the building giving away free coffee. And I said, well, why are you giving away free coffee? And he said, well, look over there. So we run part of our energy here through methane, and if you use our bathrooms, we will give you free coffee. So I had free coffee. And David Orr, in his compelling essay, What is Education For? You can find it online if you just type that in with his name. It'll come up. Talks about a typical day on the planet Earth. And I already quoted one of the stats that he mentioned. Each day we force 40 to 140 species into extinction and do not know the exact number. And he talks about how every day a certain amount of square kilometers of rainforest is destroyed. As you know well, it's the area of a football field per second. So if we were to go to Varsity Stadium on the U of T campus and go in that 50-yard line center area, and look around and count 1, 2, 3. Well, 3 times that area of tropical rainforest had just been destroyed, something the size of Austria per year. He goes on to do a litany of other environmental destructions that are done each day. But he says this isn't done by uneducated people. This isn't done by plans gone awry. This is done by people with BAs, BScs, MAs, MScs, PhDs, LLBs, from the best universities in the world. What is our education for if it doesn't help us move in a different direction? And he likens our educational model today to Germany at the time of the Holocaust and slightly before. As the Holocaust was beginning to unfold, people would say, this can't be possible. The German people are so well educated. It's the land of Goethe, of Bach, of Schiller, of Fichte. How could this well-educated group of people do this? And what he said was, quoting Elie Wiesel, it was the values that they learned or didn't learn. That was the problem. And so that's why scientists, policymakers, politicians even, are turning to faith communities now to say, can you help us? In 1990, a group of 32 world-renowned scientists, some of them Nobel Prize winners, some of them no longer with us, like Stephen Jay Gould and Carl Sagan, wrote an open letter to the religious communities of North America. And they said, our data is showing that this earth is being shredded. We sense a mystery in the universe. We may not be religious people, but we know that the most elegant policies that are written on earth will not be worth the paper they're on if people's values don't change. That's where you come in. We need you to make this a top moral and spiritual element. Out of that, the National Religious Partnership for the Environment was born, and many offshoots in terms of the kinds of coalition that we represent here. This is a response from non-religious brothers and sisters who are looking to the faith communities now more and more directly and sometimes desperately for guidance. And it's a great call, and we are very privileged to be part of that call. And people like David Orr are working more and more with environmental communities in religious circles to help advance those value systems. David Orr is also part of the Oberlin Project, which has partnered with the city of Oberlin, Ohio, to have a zero ecological footprint by, I think it's 2025. And right now, the power generation plant municipally owned in Oberlin is run on 90% renewable energy. And I'm told by the sustainability director there, by 2014, it would be 100% renewable energy, powering both the city and the university. So these models and outreaches are there, and they're happening. But I think it's important for us who enter the conversation from a faith-based perspective to realize the churches aren't the leaders here. We have not been at the forefront of environmental thinking. We stand on the shoulders and rely on the insights of many from other worlds and other times and other orientations. And one of them is Aldo Leopold, the father of environmental ethics, who wrote, "A thing is right when it tends to maintain the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it's not." And it's interesting, Leopold, who was a conservation biologist, had his leap forward, his metanoia, when, in the early part of the 20th century, he was helping to eradicate the western timber wolf. U.S. Congress and state authorities had declared the wolf a varmint, V-A-R-M-I-N-T, and they had to be eliminated. So he was part of the team doing this in New Mexico when he had his metanoia. And he describes this in the Sand County Almanac. And he's on a hill shooting down into a pack of wolves, shooting a mother wolf and her cubs, her pups, and he notices all of a sudden a green fire in the mother wolf's eyes that began to die, a green fire in her eye. And he began to realize that maybe I'm just not killing a dumb varmint. Maybe I'm killing something that has far more value and wisdom than I realize. And maybe I have to start thinking like a wolf and thinking like a mountain that the wolf lives on. Because as a biologist, he saw the results of what he did. They would kill the wolf population, the deer population would soar, so that lots of hunters had lots of deer to kill. But they overpopulated, they stripped the forest, and then they had to go in and kill the deer as government officials. So we did not think like a mountain. It began a process whereby he became the father of deep ecology and environmental ethics, because he extended our ethics in a Western context to include non-human nature. And he also said that we need, in a sense, an ethics of the heart, not simply a rational ethics, that we have to learn to develop a love, respect, and admiration for the land through an ecological conscience. A love, respect, and admiration for the land. And here he begins to move ethics into an area that people now are picking up on as something much broader than simply a rational philosophical head trick. And I think he still speaks to us, particularly in faith communities, about the need to love, a need for our ethics to be combined with a love, mind and heart nexus in our outreach to the natural world. Now this just reminds me of another attempt at humor. Now this is something slightly different, but there's an atheist, devout atheist, and he's hiking in the forest in Banff National Park, having a great time. All of a sudden, he encounters a grizzly bear. He stops, the bear stops. All of a sudden, the man panics and he runs, and he's running through the forest, and the bear's chasing after him. And all of a sudden, he starts to pray, he says, "Dear God, save me." And God speaks to him, and God says, "You know, this is curious, because all your life you've denied my existence." Logan says, yeah, okay, good point. Well, at least make the bear a God-fearing Christian. So God says, fine, it's done. So the bear stops. The man stops, and the man looks at the bear, and the bear bends its huge head and folds its gigantic paws. And the bear says, "Dear Lord, for the meal that I'm about to receive." That was his little leap forward. So, Leopold, of course, was followed by Rachel Carson. What you're seeing here are images of DDT being sprayed on American citizens in a demonstration film from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, showing how safe DDT is while you have it with your sandwich and your. It's good while And then what was happening, of course, in the 50s and early 60s was the DDT was being sprayed on public lands not only, but also private lands. And people in nature reserves, etc., are all of a sudden seeing massive die-offs of birds and other species. DDT, as you know, really hit the raptor population so that eagles, falcons, etc., couldn't reproduce. The biomagnification occurred when they ate fish and other wildlife so that their eggs would never come to term. So the image, or the thought, of spring without birdsong is what motivated Rachel Carson to write Silent Spring. Could you imagine our spring coming forward here and not hearing robins, not hearing the sounds of the migratory birds and the cardinals, the sparrows? That's what she imagined, and that's why she named it Silent Spring. It's interesting to whom she dedicates the book. Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer, the Christian theologian turned doctor who devoted his life to service in Africa, who had written about the reverence for life in light of the nuclear age and the environmental age, an early pioneer in environmental thinking who inspired Rachel Carson. When she published this book, it led to a firestorm of controversy. The chemical companies were furious. And one of the main spokesmen for the chemical companies was a man named Dr. Robert White Stevens with American Cyanide. And he went on hustling, speaking against Rachel Carson and the book. What's interesting here is there's Rachel Carson's courage, but there's also courage of many people along the line of that book's publication. Here you're going to see an excerpt from one of Robert White Stevens' commentaries.
The fulcrum over which the argument chiefly rests is that Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment.
And there again, we see a divergence of worldviews. Dr. Robert White Stevens, talking about the modern chemist, the modern scientist, is steadily trying to control nature. That's our job. And Rachel Carson talking differently, that we are part of this intricate web of life, that we are, and here she's influenced by Aldo Leopold, who said that we are not masters and overlords, but just plain members and citizens of the bio community. This is why she's often pointed toward as the fountainhead of the modern environmental movement, partly because the worldview shift of our role as humans. But the chain of courage that led to this is instructive. So, Rachel Carson first had this idea in the late 40s and early 50s, and she would try to get various publications interested, such as Reader's Digest. They turned her down cold, even though she was a best-selling author at the time. So she decided to write a book, and she presented it to Holt & Mifflin, her publisher. They read it, signed the contract, thought it would be an important book, certainly not a bestseller. But then they started getting threatening letters from various chemical companies, such as Velsicol, saying, "We will sue you if you go ahead. This is a spurious scientist, she's an activist," even suggesting she was in league with communist forces in the United States. Holt & Mifflin said, "Go away. We've signed her. She's a good author. We're going ahead." The New Yorker magazine decided to do pre-publication excerpts in their publication, and they started running them. They got threatening letters from Velsicol and other chemical companies saying the same thing. And they said, "Go away. We're publishing." The book is published, and it creates incredible controversy, but it takes off immediately, partly because of the controversy. It's chosen as a Book of the Month Club and immediately goes on to the New York Times bestseller list. Robert White Stevens of American Cyanide goes and tours, as do other agricultural scientists around the United States, speaking against the book. CBS News decides to interview Rachel Carson with Eric Severar in her home. A week before the broadcast, they get 1,000 letters, maybe regret, saying, "Be careful with this thing. This woman is not who she claims she is. She's not a bona fide scientist. She's an activist, and you don't want to give your time to a fraud." They decide to go ahead. 2 days before the broadcast, all the sponsors pulled out of the program. all the advertisers pulled out. CBS News at that time was not owned by a larger conglomerate, and they said, we're going ahead with the interview. You saw a segment of that interview just now with Eric Severino. That night at home, someone was watching, Senator Abraham Ribicoff of Connecticut. Now, Senator Ribicoff had not read Simon's Grave, had not read the excerpts in the New Yorker. He saw the TV show. And the next day he called for hearings in the U.S. Senate on pesticide use. And a number of years later, DDT was outlawed in the United States and Canada. It was a chain of courage. It was people doing their jobs as they saw it and not buckling under pressure. People acting with integrity. Some scientists said the best thing they did, the most important thing they did in their careers, was simply surreptitiously giving information to Rachel Carson. Some of them, when they were found out, were fired from their jobs. So yes, we had a valiant woman fighting cancer at the time, showing remarkable courage. But many other people along the way made that story happen. And that's, I think, the leap of faith, the leap of courage, the chain of courage that we're invited to attend to now. We're being invited in whatever role in society we happen to fill to do what we think is right around the world, and not to give in to pressures that don't speak to the values of what we're doing. We don't all have to be heroes, but if we do our jobs with integrity as we see it, and move forward as people in the faith community, attentive to the signs of the Spirit, then we can make a very powerful difference.
First, I hope this committee will give serious consideration to a much neglected problem, that of the right of the citizen to be secure in his own home against the intrusion of poisons applied by other persons. I speak not as a lawyer, but as a biologist and as a human being. But I strongly feel that this is or should be one of the basic human rights.
And that's Rachel Carson speaking at the invitation of Senator Ribicoff in front of the U.S. Senate. And again, when you see what normal people have done without a lot of support to help change environmental history, it can be breathtaking. And one of those is Lois Gibbs from Love Canal, Niagara Falls. Lois Gibbs, a housewife, not highly educated, middle class to lower middle class, when she found out about the countless toxins in the drinking water of her family, organized around the contamination of Love Canal. This resulted in the Superfund site legislation signed by Jimmy Carter. This woman did not have graduate degrees in biology or in toxicology, but she had a very deep and profound commitment to her family, to her community, to the health of her planet, and made a remarkable difference. Also, in the United States, as you well know, in this group, there emerged something known as environmental racism. And Robert Buller, a sociologist, along with Benjamin Chavez of the United Church of Christ, began to map toxic waste sites in certain neighborhoods in the Middle Atlantic states, Maryland, Virginia, etc. And they came to a starting conclusion that the majority of these were in neighborhoods of poor African Americans or Hispanics. They weren't in other wealthy neighborhoods. And so they saw a pattern. And what they help us see is that the environmental crisis runs along the same fault lines of racial, political, economic, gender oppression. This is a seamless garment that they help us see. And here the churches have a tremendous contribution to make, because linking the social justice tradition and the social teachings of various churches with an emerging understanding of environmental destruction leads to a powerful convergence of analysis. This isn't just for white middle-class people in the environmental movement. This is something that affects us all. And so we see people who are part of this larger chain of courage. And when we look to the global south and see these connections, we look at where the 3 most polluted places on Earth are. Among the 10, one's in Kabwe, Zambia, where lead and cadmium soak the hills of Kabwe after decades of mining and processing. Lead concentrations 5 to 10 times the permissible US EPA levels, and the ground is so contaminated nothing can be grown. Here you see the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. You see how Haiti has been almost completely denuded along this border. It was once 60% forest. Today, only 2% of the country still has trees standing. Many people now say if you're from Haiti as a refugee, you're de facto an environmental refugee. And the third is from the Luna River. I just want to point 2 things out. These are 2 boys swimming. They're healthy, I mean, they're just swimming. But it's estimated that 58% of the city's waste gets dumped straight into the river. And millions still rely on these waters for washing, drinking water, and waste disposal. Lawrence Summers, when he was head of the World Bank as chief economist, wrote a memo saying, "I've always thought that Africa was vastly underpopulated and underpolluted. The logic of dumping our toxic waste in Africa is impeccable." It's quoted in various sources, a book that I did with my wife, The Green Bible, where you have that quote in there. Lawrence Summers later became president of Harvard and said that women couldn't do math and engineering as well as men, and the students got on their hind legs and helped force his removal. But he landed flying into the Obama White House and became the chief economic advisor during the bailouts for President Obama. These ideas and people have consequences. And we cannot allow people to say that it's acceptable for poor people to be polluted. Leonardo Boff, as many of you know, is a leading liberation theologian in Brazil. And he makes this connection between the option for the earth and the option for the poor, particularly among indigenous tribes in the Amazonian basin. Tribes, in some cases, that had never had contact with the market economy, but are being bulldozed and steamrolled and burned out by the same forces that are destroying the rainforest for mining and cattle. These communities of vulnerable people are also being destroyed. Again, making that connection between social teaching on the option for the poor with an emerging teaching on the option for the earth. And this is part of the legacy of people of faith. Part of, I think, the crux of taking a leap is knowing your relations and knowing that you're deeply interrelated. And here, as many of you understand well, the wisdom of our First Nations is so crucial. Here are figured Oren Lyons, Audrey Shenandoah of the Onondaga clan of the Mohawk in upstate New York, Danny Beaton, a filmmaker here in Toronto, activist of Achievement Award winner 2 years ago, and Wilmer Nanjawan, former chief of Cape Croker, World War II veteran and artist. Danny Beaton was instrumental in stopping Dump Site 41. He had a press conference years ago with Elizabeth May and Maud Barlow and marched from the Legislative Assembly up to Elmvale in the snow and rain and sleet and camped out with women from Christian Island to stop an aquifer being destroyed at Dump Site 41. For that, he won the Aboriginal Achievement Award. He also was instrumental in stopping the Mayport and did the spiritual services before the soup stock and other large gatherings. He's gone around and filmed elders in North America so that their wisdom would be at least preserved on film. And one of them is Iroquois Speak Out from Mother Earth, in which Audrey Shenandoah and Oren Lyons are interviewed. He reminds us that we are in deep relationship with non-human nature. And the first time I heard Danny speak was at a conference at Ryerson University. And he got up and he said, this is why my people in Mohawk hang out near the fire and have ceremonies with the water and with the winds, because that's who we are. We are the earth, we are the air, we are the fire, we are the water. Well, he sits down And then a physicist gets up, Helmut Burkhardt. And Helmut says, I've come to the same conclusions, Danny Beaton, as a physicist, but it's taken me a long 40-year detour through Western science. But I've come to the same conclusion. Because at the subatomic level, we're now realizing that we are sharing matter and or energy when we get in proximity with the earth, the fire, and water, and other dimensions. The relationality. There is no downstream. That we are deeply interconnected. It's not just a metaphor. It's not just something that sounds poetic. It's becoming a lived and understood reality. And helping ourselves understand this in all its intersubjectivity, I think, becomes a moment of change, a catalyst for metanoia. This is a picture taken from Apollo 8 on the right. That was the first mission to go around the moon, a first manned mission to go around, a human mission to go around the world. This picture, though, was sent back to the United States, and it was changed. It was put so that it looked like the Earth was rising, and it was called Earth. This is a little jarring in a sense, because we're all floating. When we think of ourselves here looking up at the Earth, we feel a little more rooted. But this is the way the picture was taken as the command module was orbiting the moon. Thomas Berry, a cultural historian and geologian, not a theologian, a Roman Catholic priest, recently deceased, would talk about our need to address the great work of our time, which is healing human-earth relations, and to put ourselves in connection with the larger unfoldment of the earth. And he said, really, this is where we have to be. We have to let the earth and the cosmos speak to us as we see them, not as we'd like to see them. In a sense, listen to how the Spirit is at work in the unfolding of the universe, and then knowing our place environmentally. Again, for him, this is a hopeful time, a time of great joy, a time of great celebration, of great destruction as well, and challenge. But joy is primary in this whole story. One man who's helping us see this joy, particularly with children, is Richard Booth, author of Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. Some of you might know of his work. He's been very influential in educational circles and increasingly religious circles, and also environmental circles. So about 8 months ago, David Suzuki had him come up to Toronto, and they had a time together at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And in talking with them, it was fascinating to hear their reflections on the power of nature to help us with psychological disorders. So in the book, Richard Booth harvests research from major universities in Australia, US, UK, Canada, about children who are suffering from attention deficit disorder, from suicidal tendency, depression, and how they get better when they're in proximity to nature. So the Suzuki Foundation has picked up on this. And they now have the 30-30 campaign, spending 30 days in nature, 30 minutes a day, as part of their activism and outreach. Richard Booth, 2 years ago, spoke to a group of pediatricians, the American Pediatricians Association. And his wife's a registered nurse, and he was a little nervous before going there. So his wife took his face in his hands and said, "Look, these are not like other doctors. They're nice people." So he gave the talk, and a number of physicians came up and said, "This is going to change the way we do medicine." Now he's in touch with many of them. Many are giving a nature prescription to children rather than putting them on Ritalin or another drug. And there's a park in Portland, Oregon, where the children take their nature prescriptions and meet the park staff. And the park staff look at it and design programs. I like to say, climb 2 maypoles and call me in the morning. But he said they now feel like they're parahealth professionals. In a sense, they're helping these children connect with nature and find some joy and relationality in their lives. And this is now affecting curricula across North America. Part of the leap, I think, that we have to do, this is particularly true for me at a university, is to make a leap from knowledge to wisdom, from scientia to sapientia, using Latin. We do a lot on knowledge, and there's a lot of knowledge generation. But where is wisdom found? And that's sometimes part of what the religious traditions are about, is it not? How we relate these various ages of knowledge to a larger whole. And if the religious groups are not helping us find wisdom, people are going to seek wisdom elsewhere. This notion of research for research's sake is something that is problematic. At the university, we write research grants. We don't really write wisdom grants. Lots of money for research, very little for wisdom. But we need wisdom desperately now. And it's almost a leap from lifestyle to life way. When you think of what's your lifestyle, you think of something that's kind of consumer-driven and kind of funky, and you can go to the gym and exercise, and then, But the life way, which is often used to describe certain traditional ways of living, aboriginal ways of living, etc., suggests something a little more inclusive and a little less purchased. And at this point, I just want to tell a story, if I may. This story is included in For Earth's Sake Toward Compassionate Ecology. And I'm just going to refer to it here, because it was a kind of a personal metanoia for myself. So the story begins, did you ever think of giving up your car? Now, I tell this story as someone privileged living in downtown Toronto. If I were living in Brampton, I'd have a car, no doubt about it. I was thinking, my wife and I had come to downtown Toronto, and for the first time we had mass transit around. So I thought, maybe we don't need our car. So I posed this question to my wife it was about 10 years ago now. She rolled her eyes and the bubbles above her head flashed the words, ridiculous, impossible. Recycling and composting are fine, dear, I heard her thoughts missile toward me, but this is going way too far. I felt like Galileo proposing a heliocentric universe to quote Urban the Suddenly, I was questioning a sacred tradition. After all, this was the way the world had been since the ancient Greeks, wasn't it? In fact, wasn't it Heraclitus who said that to be fully human, one needed locomotion, preferably in a Lexus? I suddenly was asking the crew crowd, do I dare disturb the universe? Well, after a cup of tea, some calmness entered on the conversation. My wife and I were able to discuss the pros and cons of not renewing the lease on our car, now that we were living in the city. On the plus side, we knew that we would save some money. At that time, the estimates were around an annual savings of $7,000. It's a little more now. And we knew, of course, it would be environmentally beneficial. According to Pollution Probe, an average lightweight car in Canada annually spews 4,480 kilograms of carbon monoxide, 200 kilograms of carbon dioxide, and a noxious soup of other gases. So that would have got. But on the downside, we knew that it would be an inconvenience. We would be dependent on public transit. Shopping would be more labor intensive, and if we had an emergency with our young son, we would have to rely on friends, a car, an ambulance, taxis, etc. Well, after several months and many tea-laden conversations, my wife joined me in the heliocentric universe. We gave up the car. For 6 months. That was the deal. And during our first carless weekend, my wife went out and rented a car, and it sat in the driveway of a free-floating life raft. She's given me permission to tell the story. Anyway, we both viewed the prospect as primarily a sacrifice. But a funny thing happened on the way to carless living. We gradually became aware of unforeseen benefits, silver linings that came dropping slowly into our horizons of awareness. First, we noticed less stress in our lives. Instead of waiting to the last minute to get somewhere, plopping in the car, snaking our way through traffic snarls and snarling motors, some of them were foaming at the mouth, we found our travel was more relaxed on public transit. We didn't have control over it, but we weren't as likely to get killed doing it either. As you know, 3,000 people are killed in automobile accidents in Canada each year, approximately 40,000 in the United States. One of the most dangerous forms of transportation we know. Also for me, because I was the car caretaker, I wasn't burdened with a low-grade anxiety about getting a ticket, or being towed, or changing the oil, or driving through lousy weather, or checking the tires, etc. So that low-grade fever just about did. Secondly, we found that on the streetcar or subway often we could talk together as a family. Our streetcar time became a bit of family story time. And we would take this St. Clair streetcar and drop our son off at Brown School right here. And then my wife and I would walk together on campus. So we'd have time to get caught up. So Carlos had led, in a sense, to enhance family bonding. Thirdly, we noticed a marked decrease in impulse buying. We were much less likely to go out in minus 20-degree weather or rain-soaked evening to get a film or a dessert or some other non-essential without a car. Also, we were reluctant to buy anything larger than a loaf of bread without serious strategy. Less stress, increased family bonding, diminished consumerism. We had not counted on these when we decided to relinquish our vehicle. These for us were spiritual as well as material benefits. So as we in Canada, and we in North America, and we as world citizens ponder the costs of various climate change accords, ponder the costs of transition to renewable resources, perhaps we might view striving for societal sustainability as not just a matter of hair shirt, sackcloth, ashes, and sacrifice. This isn't about everyone giving up one's car, and as I said, we were privileged to be downtown. If I were elsewhere with other circumstances, I would certainly have a car. But it's about discerning how we are to relate to this new ecological moment. Some fundamental changes make room in your life for new and fine things to happen. It's not just about sacrifice, but about making a space for a novel and possibly enhanced way of life. And for me, it's like falling in love. How many of us, when we meet someone, when we were younger or when we were still unmarried or hadn't found our life partner, and we found someone and we found ourselves thinking, oh, I might be falling in love with this person. It could be very challenging. I could get kicked around if I make myself vulnerable. I could get run over. But how many of us would have ever chosen not to have fallen in love? We're being invited, I think, as citizens, people of faith, people of the earth, to learn to fall in love with the earth itself, with the non-human neighbors. It's not all about sacrifice. It's about joy and celebration and beauty and love. And I look forward to traveling with you in this love-filled universe. Thank you.